Welcome to Kamado All Sorts UK. In this video, which is my second video that I've ever done, I'm going to be cooking some apple smoked and sarsaparilla cherry glazed barbecue ribs. These ribs I bought from Farmfoods. I only discovered these through another YouTube video about 7 or 8 months ago now. Since then I have cooked these about 4 or 5 times and each time they've come out really good. Now you may be wondering why my hotspot is towards the front, and that's purely because I don't like my wood chunks smoking while the kamado is preheating. I always set it to the front when I'm doing low and slow. My wood chunks are underneath the charcoal in the centre and towards the back. Generally in kamados, in at least a indirect mode, the burn tends to travel from the front towards the back, generally, not always, but more often than not. Once the firelighter is burnt out and a fire has been established, I'll put the cooking frame in along with the ceramic plates. I like to put them in a separated position just so that the rest of the kamado heat soaks a little bit more evenly. Also, at this very early stage, it reduces the risk of accidentally snuffing out the fire. My target temperature for this cook is 135 degrees Celsius or 275 degrees Fahrenheit. I find in a kamado at least, a higher temperature like this just gives you a better bark. And this is mainly due to the low airflow that kamados give, unlike say an offset that has high airflow, develops bark really well, and you can get away with that 225 magic number. Once the kamado hits the target temperature, I set the bottom vent to the desired setting and then close the ceramic deflector plates. I then put the drip trays directly on top, which is why my deflector plates are pretty clean, and also put my stainless steel grids. So here are the ribs. As you can see, they have some pretty decent marbling throughout and a decent amount of fat. I've done some very minimal trimming. I've also removed the membrane. I always prefer to do that. I know some people prefer to score them, some people prefer to just leave them alone. When it comes to pork ribs, I like to remove them all the time. Now, because these come supplied frozen, I put them in the fridge on Friday night so they could defrost for 24 hours, and then Saturday night I dry brine them with some Maldon sea salt. For a binder, I'm just going to use some American mustard. Works pretty well, and I've never been able to taste it. I've also made a basic rub while the kamado was coming up to temperature. It basically consists of paprika, ground coriander, ground cumin, freshly ground black pepper and some chili powder. I will put the quantities in the description so you don't have to keep rewinding this. With the deflector plates in place, It's now holding steady on 135 degrees Celsius, well maybe just a tiny little bit over, 275 degrees Fahrenheit. And on the ribs go, right in the middle. As you can see, these ribs pretty much reach all the way across the kamado. This is a classic sized kamado, or I think it's a large size when it comes to a big green egg. So the first check is 2 hours into the cook, checking the temperature. It's about 170-ish, 175 in the middle, Fahrenheit that is. I tend to go with Fahrenheit for internal temperatures and Celsius with ambient temperatures. Don't know why, just do. A closer look as well at that 2 hour mark. As you can see, the fat is rendering out, the bark is just starting to develop a little bit. Once I hit the 3 hour mark, decided to have another look, check on that bark. There's a little bit of dry areas, so I just put some apple cider vinegar and water just to give it a bit of a spritz. I only ended up having to spritz these once throughout the whole cook. So onto the sarsaparilla and cherry glaze. Very simple, 2 ingredients. I'm just going to be using 1/3 of a cup of the cherry syrup and 2/3 of a cup of sarsaparilla soda or pop, whatever you want to call it. This turned out to be way too much for this cook, for one set of ribs. Next time I'll probably go with 2 tablespoons of cherry syrup and 4 tablespoons of the sarsaparilla. Regardless of what the measurements you use, I use 1/3 cherry, 2/3 sarsaparilla. Another check at the 4 hour mark, and these ribs are pretty much done. Very probe tender. I should have started glazing these a little bit sooner, but I did lose a bit of track of time, to be honest. And well, yeah, that's that. I should have probably started to glaze these at the 3.5 hour mark. As you can see, I'm mopping these on quite a bit at a time. The amount of sugar that's in the cherry syrup should help to just glaze it a little bit. give you a close-up view of that glaze, well, when it's just freshly brushed on. It's not quite a glaze yet. And you can see the bones protruding out, so they are pretty much cut, so that's one of the signs. The second glazing seems to give like a really deep reddish colour to the ribs. Some of that red is obviously from the smoky flavour, but they just seem to be that little bit more deeper in red than usual. I'm glazing these once every half an hour or so. That second glaze is now, well, glazed on. I've took them off because they are ready to go now. I'm going to wrap them up with some of this paper, just to let them rest for half an hour or so, maybe just a bit longer, 45 minutes. As you can see, the redness that it gives. Got a really good bark on this. If you wanted to make these stickier, you could use more cherry syrup or just cherry syrup, and they will become stickier. The sarsaparilla does thin it out a bit and reduces that sugar ratio content. Let's have a good look at these ribs, see how they've turned out after the resting. Here's a close-up view for the camera, just to show that bark and the colour. And time for the first cut. Let's see if we can go straight through in between the bones. I usually tend to land on a bone when I'm doing these. So there's the first look. Got a decent smoke ring on the top, not so much on the bottom, but that's generally because of the bones. This one's a bit of a better view. Squeeze some of that juice out. Everyone likes to see that. In hindsight, I should have used a chopping board rather than the non-stick tray. Next time I will use a chopping board, although the tray itself was not harmed during the production of this, so no scratches. And on to the taste test. So after trying these ribs, yeah, they're just as good as last time. Well, possibly even better. The bark, a much better development this time. A little bit overcooked underneath where the bones are, but there's generally not much meat there, so I'm not too concerned about that. The smokiness, you can get that apple smoke right the way through. Quite a deep smoky flavour. The cherry, well, you can't taste the cherry. It just adds a sweetness to the ribs to counter the saltiness that they naturally have. And then you get the spices in there. The sugar obviously helps create the bark, and the sarsaparilla. Again, you can't quite taste that on its own, but it just adds to a depth of flavour. It all blends together really nicely. I do think the flavour profile of these ribs can be a crowd pleaser, because people who don't like really salty ribs, well, they're not going to get salty ribs, and people who don't like really ridiculously syrupy sweet ribs, they're not going to get that. It's a nice blend of both, really. And that's the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Hopefully I will try and get better at doing this. There's so much I need to learn. Thank you for your time, and hopefully you'll tune in for the next video.